Ritesh, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you,
Hi,
Gavin?
Ritesh. Great. Good. How are you doing?
All right.
All right. So we just wanted to have a quick check if you share your screen, everything's working before we begin.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me do that quickly. Hey, can you see my screen?
We can. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Should I just keep it up or should I put it back down?
I'm going to be sharing just a quick brief view of the document itself. So maybe pop that down for now, and I'll hand it over to you a bit later.
Sure.
Great.
Hi, Shiga. I think we can start.
Yeah, Kolofela, can you do me a favor, please? Can you bounce the invitation to Mr. Devin Peter in the library? He is struggling to connect with us and he would like to join the meeting.
Okay, I'll forward him the invitation.
Thank you. So everybody, welcome and thank you for being patient while we get up and running and make sure that we have all the people that we need in the room. I'm going to hand you straight over to Dr. Gavin Owen, who has been spearheading the discussion in our faculty about AI usage, what we can do, what we can't do as staff on the one hand, but today I think the discussion will focus a little bit more on the student perspective and what we would like our students to be doing with regard to AI usage. So I want to welcome everybody and hand straight over to Gavin, who can get us going with today's proceedings.
Great. Thanks so much, Shira. Yeah, I don't want to take too much of our time. I'd like us to get to our expert of the day as soon as possible and allow as much space for questions and conversations about the topic today as possible. So just give you a little bit of a background and some context of the talk today. So I chair the AI in Faculty Health, the Faculty of Health Science Education Task Team, which is a subgroup of the greater committee, the Faculty of Health Sciences Educational Technologies Committee, who's chaired by our Assistant Dean, Paula Ashton Barnett. And one of our first initiatives and one of our first goals was to develop some guidelines for both staff and students to be able to use for the ethical use and the correct use of AI. As we all know, that AI is here to stay, and it's a very powerful tool to be leveraged by us for a variety of our functions at the university, but particularly for teaching and education. And many people are still wading in the dark about what and how and what we should be allowing our students to do and how we should be able to use it. So we would like to develop a set of guidelines for both staff and students about how to get it and get everyone on the same page about what the faculty stance is and what the university stance is about how to go about using AI effectively. And to be able to do that, we wanted to develop this document for students about the do's and don'ts and perhaps some practical tips, but also a bit of a declaration, a statement of when we do use AI to just declare it like a bit of a declaration of plagiarism that we haven't plagiarized. And that started this conversation about how we go about informing staff and students about the best use of this AI. And to do that, we explored who has been doing these guidelines, and as many of you might know, many people have been engaging with this concept, these topics, and have started to develop their own AI guidelines for their departments throughout our faculty and throughout the university. And we found that the fact of science, with many experts in AI, have generated some really, really useful, valuable guidelines for staff and students, still in development and discussion, that can be used that can be adapted by us in the faculty for our use. And that's where our speaker comes in today. Prof. Ritesh Ajoodha is from the Explainable AI Lab in the School of Computer Science and Applied Mathematics. And you'll see, is an expert in AI, and he was pivotal in the design and development of the guidelines that the Faculty of Science have developed. And we, as a faculty, have decided to draw on that document to adapt and develop our own. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen just to show you the document as such. And this is the Faculty of Science, which we've developed for our own in many ways. But what it is, it's a little bit of introduction blurb about what AI is. What's important, though, and we're going to become chatting to that today, is some of the do's and don'ts that students can use, as well as later. And you can see there's a variety of ones that will be discussed today. An appendix for declaring AI use, about if the student uses it, to declare how they've used it and which tools they've used. If in fact the assignment in which the students are doing it are allowed to use, we have allowed it to it in alignment with objectives for those courses. So this is still being ratified and confirmed and approved by many of the higher levels. So it's still in development, but we wanted to start the conversation and get input and some questions and by the faculty and spread this net wide so that we can get engagement around how to improve this and adapt this. But it will be shared and it will be made available to many of you, to all of us. Many of you, I know that some departments are already using this. So that is just a little bit of a background before we hand over to our expert, Ritesh. So Ritesh, please take it away. Hopefully that was an accurate reflection of the guidelines you have been so important in developing, and we appreciate your time and being with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Owen, for the kind introduction. So I am from the School of Computer Science in the Faculty of Science, and I look after a lab called the Explainable AI Lab. So I am really passionate about privacy and the way we actually use AI to account for its decisions. And you might not think of AI as being something that's accountable, but it turns out that it is involved in a lot of strategic decision making. And we should have a mechanism to understand how it makes decisions. So my lab is all about tracing those mechanisms, because these models can get very complicated. And we need to have ways of having interpretability so that we can use them in places where we have strong ethical considerations, such as education, such as in medicine, something that you are all involved in. So the title of this talk is Using AI Responsibly, and it's mainly aimed, even though I'm presenting this to academic staff, this is mainly aimed to guide students through their use of AI for their assessments, for their brainstorming, and all of these other things that were mentioned on that list. Right, so we've seen AI being used for a whole lot of things in different disciplines, such as in medicine and in psychology and in other applications as well. But let's look specifically at education. How can generative AI be used in education? So we have just a few use cases on the board here. One of it is using it as a Socratic tutor. So those of you who are not familiar with Socrates, he was a philosophical thinker, and he urged people to think for themselves. He probed critical thinking within individuals so that they could answer their own questions with guidance. And so AI can be used in that way. And I'll show you an example. So that's what I would consider what good use actually is. A talk like this is very difficult to give. And it's mainly because everyone has different opinions about what good use actually is and what good use ought to be. But there should be some things that we all can agree on. And so what I try in this presentation is try to find that common ground. So because it's not good enough to have a policy that just says use AI as a study buddy. That's not good enough, because something like that can be manipulated into all sorts of different intent. Instead, if we have a policy that has practical examples, then supervisors and course coordinators and lecturers, which we are able to draw from those guidelines to create their own policies for their own research labs, for their own first-year cohorts, and so on. So we have to have some practicality in the guides that we write so that we can use them to create policies. So I'll try to present some of those in this talk as well. So just putting it out there that it is a difficult talk to give because of the strong opinions that most people have about how to use AI. So there are other reasons why we would use AI in education, and one of that is decolonizing concepts. It turns out that AI is very good at relating very complex phenomenon, very complex concepts into something practical and something that can be relatable to the user. And this can be done in conversation using a chatbot. And there are really good examples online of how you can do that. It's also used for jargon simplification. If you have a word that you don't fully understand, like maybe eutrophication, then you could use an AI to help you break that down. You can even ask it to explain gravity to you as if you were 10 years old, and it'll be able to do so without using any complex terminology. Some students have used it for personalized tests. So they identify areas where they are weak. And what they do is they ask the AI to focus on those particular areas and assess themselves so that they can better prepare for exams or tutorials. And the last two examples are one that I even use in my lab, in the Explainable AI lab. It's when a student just comes out of their undergraduate degree and they're now in honors. They have to digest a very complicated paper that has lots of mathematics in it, lots of complex processes. And what AI can actually do for you there is that it can reverse engineer a paper and break down the methodology in a simpler understanding so that the student can at least digest the general idea of the paper before they get into the technicalities. Because we all know some papers are riddled with jargon, and this makes it very difficult for students to traverse. And the last thing is using AI as a reviewer of some of the ideas that you had. So you can have a piece of work that maybe you've written a paper, and you can ask an AI a chatbot to actually just give you some ideas on the weaknesses of the paper and what can be improved. Obviously, this is all subject to the limitations of AI, which I'll speak about in a few slides. Okay, so let's give you an idea of what I meant by a Socratic tutor. So a student comes to something like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, and it asks, how do vaccines work if they don't cure anything? And so the AI will say something like, interesting point, what does the immune system do when it sees a virus for the first time? So this, can you see, it's probing the student to think about the context, to think about something more critically. And so the student would answer maybe that it takes a long time to respond, the immune system that is. And so then the robot could ask, so what happens when it sees the virus the second time? Well, then it's much faster because it's seen it before. So the AI then adds some positive reinforcements and says, exactly, the vaccine trains your immune system by showing it a safe version of the virus first. And so what from this example, you can see that using AI as a Socratic tutor can actually probe questions, allowing for a deep understanding of the material. So this is what I would consider a good use of AI, using AI to be able to understand a concept. And this is true. I've chosen a very simple health sciences example here, but in my discipline, in computer science, you can easily ask it to explain. You can ask it questions about conditional probability distributions. It can help you understand things like Bayes' theorem. It can help you understand integration, differentiation in very edge cases, things that you would need a personalized tutor to help you with. So even though this is a very basic example, it has potential to be used for a lot more technical concepts. So we all talk about these large language models. Does anybody actually know what a large language model is? Well, this is where my expertise comes into play. I worked with these models for a long time. And so I just tried to bring it to a very basic concept. A large language model is really a neural network. And if you're not familiar with what neural networks are, it is an attempt by humans to mimic the processes of the brain in a computing system. And so as a result of that, we mimic the behavior of neurons and synapses and the interactions between them. So something like ChatGPT, for example, has GPT-4, for example, has about 1 trillion parameters, which is a couple of million neurons, which all go together to give you the output that it does. Okay, so just to talk about technically about what this actually is. So it's a good idea to have some kind of understanding of how these models work, even if you might never see this again, just to at least be able to visualize how things are working in the back end. So neural networks, which are these large language models, these transformer architectures, are really just nonlinear functions. It's a way of separating data. It's what we call supervised data, which is labeled data. And this nonlinear function is able to wrap around the data because it has lots of parameters. Like I said in GPT-4, about 1 trillion parameters. Because it has many parameters, it's able to wrap around and separate a lot of the training data so that it can be able to classify and discriminate and generate new instances. And it does this with neurons and synapse, and you can see these little circles are example of neurons, and the connections between them are an example of these synapses which are simulated. And so you have an input which could be a word or context, and the output can be the next word, which is exactly how transformer architectures work. So if you really think about what this is, it's just a nonlinear function. And so I've written it down here in a mathematical way, how all of these things fit together as a nonlinear function. And this is how it's basically represented. Now, to train this or to learn the parameters from training data, you really need some basic statistics, nothing too complicated. You need to maximize the likelihood or minimize the loss using something called stochastic gradient descent. And stochastic gradient descent has actually been around for a very long time. It's been around for about 74 years. And the backpropagation algorithm used to train neural networks have also been around for about 51 years. So the technology isn't necessarily new. It's been around for a very long time. It's only because of increasing data sources and a bunch of other things and popularity and in industry investment that this technology has really had a chance to grow very quickly. So neural networks, ChatGPT, is just basically a nonlinear function plus basic statistics plus basic optimization, which is that stochastic gradient descent. And yet it is able to do all of these really amazing things. Okay, so what are the limitations and the risks with generative AI? So when I talk about limitations, there's limitations of the model itself, and then there's also risks involved with the use of the model, which is unfortunately the risks our students are subjected to. So the known risks and limitations, obviously, because these are black box models, it's very difficult to diagnose all of the risks and the limitations because we don't, as humans, we don't understand how these models work. There isn't a human smart enough that is able to understand or follow the logic of these neural networks just because of the complexity of them. So it's basically just giving it the machinery, giving it the learning algorithms, giving it the representation, and allowing it to learn from training data without humans actually understanding how it comes up to the conclusions that it does. It sounds a bit scary. It sounds like a prelude to a horror, but we use it every day. I do believe that it can be used ethically as long as we have some kind of mechanism of evaluation, but we'll talk about it a bit later on. So what are the issues with these LLMs? Well, one of the problems, and it's something that I'm sure everyone has actually seen, is its hallucinations. It makes up facts, it makes up people, it makes up books, it makes up theorems. It could easily just make up the Ajoodha-Owen theorem, or it could make up references, academic references, the Wits Journal of Machine Learning. It does this, and it's kind of obvious why it does this. A LLM is predicting the next word, the most likely next word in a sentence. It is not predicting the most factually correct word. It is not predicting that. And those are two different problems, right? This is a statistical model, and so it is predicting the next likely occurrence of a word, not checking if it is correct or not. So this is why we have these hallucinations. In terms of data biases, these can be especially problematic. LLMs are learned by scraping information from the internet. And so we end up in situations where the LLM actually maybe has scraped up information from a non-peer-reviewed context. We have cases where LLMs, for example, only think doctors are male and nurses are all female. This is just because of the bias of the input. There's other biases as well that regarding cultures. A very famous example is Latino males associated with crime. Just the name of the individuals are associated with crime rather than any other contexts. So there's those risks as well. All of the problems with the input data fester within the model. And obviously that really means that students who are using these models are adopting these biases in their writing, in their thinking even, because of over-reliance, which brings me to the next one. So in over-reliance, we have students who use these models and then actually end up with a shallow understanding of the material. If you overuse these models and if you render all of your critical thinking to these models, and you'll end up with what we call in education shallow learning, as opposed to deep learning. Not the deep learning I was talking about on the previous slide, but deep learning is in engaging with concepts, being able to understand the mechanisms of understanding and so on. So over-reliance can really lead to shallow learning, which is a big problem. The last big limitation that I'd like to talk about, and please stop me if I'm going over time, but I think, Gavin, I still have about 20 minutes left.
Yeah, you're fine. Thanks, Ritesh. Go ahead. Okay.
So the other big issue is copyright risks and privacy concerns. So the problem really here is that when an LLM has very scarce data in a specific context, it is very likely to cut and paste words in. And you'll find sentences in that specific context are verbatim quoted from other places where there are copyright infringements. So this presents quite a concern. And this has to do with the temperature of the model, which I'll talk about a bit later on. But basically, there are a few, there is this parameter inside of a large language model called temperature. I think I'll discuss it now. So if a temperature value is very low, then the model becomes extremely factual, and it copies contexts very closely to the training data. If the temperature is very high, not the temperature, the parameter for temperature. If it's a very high value, which is closer to 1, then it becomes more random. So what people do is they use higher temperatures for creative output and lower temperatures for factual output, like, for example, in coding. And we end up in situations where in the lower temperatures, the LLM is more likely to copy things verbatim, which could now impose in copyright infringements and so on. In terms of privacy, our students might not know it, but everything you put into the model is used inside of its training. And this is true for DeepSeek. I think it is true for GPT-3 and the free version of ChatGPT. But at least for the paid versions, this is not true. So what actually happens is every single prompt you put into the model, if you put data into the model, if you put your essays, books, anything that you just drag and drop into the model, it becomes embedded within the training information, within the training data. The parameters change so that it also incorporates that data inside of the model, which is especially problematic because if somebody else happens to use the model, then if they prompt, maybe just put the right prompt, the LLM will divulge all of that information to that individual, which is a problem. All right, so that's just lightly touching the limitations and the risks of using AI. Now I'd like to talk about the Wits plagiarism policy. So we have really good documents at Wits. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. We have documents about academic integrity, about the kind of graduate attributes we want to see in our students. And this is really centered around honesty, fairness, responsibility, and there are other graduate attributes as well. But we don't really want students to be cutting and pasting material into the assessments and remarked on that, because that kind of defeats the learning objectives. It violates our learning outcomes. And so we want students to be able to think critically for themselves when engaging with assessments. And so using AIs to rewrite assignments without disclosure, we consider that to be plagiarism. And you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thanks, Ritesh. You're back.
I was muted for some reason. I have no idea how that happened. Anyways, so I was talking about students rewriting assignments. I'm not sure how much you heard, but basically what we consider to be plagiarism in our academic documents is students taking work that is not their own and maybe changing a few things and resubmitting it. That is not allowed, right? And what students are now doing is they're using things like LLMs to rewrite material. They're using things like LLMs to be able to generate material, to answer tutorial questions, to answer assignments, and they submit this work. Now, you might ask, well, why don't we use something like Turnitin just to catch students who plagiarize or to submit work that's not their own? Well, it turns out because of that temperature variable and other things like entropy and the specific trails in the neural network which are active when a student engages it with prompts, because of many of these reasons, we are not really able to determine whether a student used a large language model or not. There is really no way to do it, just because of the randomness incurred by trillions of parameters inside of the model. And so you'll find overseas where students are being accused of plagiarism, they are actually suing the universities to say that you have no basis to accuse me of using an LLM or using AI for this particular task. So I think as lecturers, we should really restrict the use of AI depending on what our learning objectives actually are. But maybe we'll have another seminar to talk about how we can do that. Okay, the big idea here is really if students are using, if they are using things like AI, they should disclose it. And I'll talk about that a bit later on. So in this document that Dr. Owen has shared with us, there are a few classes of what we consider to be good and bad practices. One of them has to do with ethical use and disclosure. The other one has to be about using it for studying. There's another one about using it for assessments, another one for using it for brainstorming ideas, idea generation and research. And then lastly, there's another one on coding, using it for coding. So what we try to do here is provide some guidelines of what you can use it for, what you shouldn't be using it for, and then maybe trying to turn bad practice into good practice with a suggestion. So if you have a look at the document, you'll see that kind of structure for each of the use cases. And so with ethical use and disclosures, what we really are trying to do here is get students to use LLMs where data privacy or data collection from the LLM is not an issue, and I believe Copilot allows for that. And also to get students to actually disclose the use of AI, because we cannot solve a problem that we have not identified. If we don't know how students use AI, we have no idea on what guidance to give them so that they can start using it better. And so in the Faculty of Science, we've started using mechanisms to collect information about how students use AI. In fact, at the first submission for postgraduates, they have to submit that form that Dr. Owen shared with us at the end, where they have to tick the boxes of what did they use AI for, and then explain exactly what did they mean when they tick those boxes, and in what scenarios was it used. And this way, even though we're not using that data to action anything on the student at this point, we are using this to learn exactly what cases the students use AI and where do they feel it is appropriate to do it. Now, whether or not it's appropriate at this particular phase, we're still having discussions about that. But the most important thing is that we are collecting information about this so we can better understand the trends of the use of AI. Okay, so when students use AI for studying and understanding concepts, we try to promote that Socratic tutorage, which I presented much earlier on. And the guide really speaks to using AI to summarize concepts, to help it understand something. And the example of the Socratic tutor is just one. There are many others as well. But what we try to not have is students copying and pasting material that comes out of these LLMs and to use them as replacements for their understanding. And there's a whole lot of other things on the guide as well about promoting good study and understanding practice. In terms of assessment integrity, what we don't want is students to just be putting our questions into these LLMs and then getting an answer. So in computer science, we joke around and we at our internal panels and we say, how much did AI get on your test? And it's usually like 90%. How much did it get on the other lecturer's test? Oh, 80%. So the AI is getting distinctions writing our assessments. So what we really don't want is students to use an AI as a replacement for their own understanding and use and acquire a shallow understanding of the learning objectives. What we want is a deep understanding. So often in assessments, what we would do is we would, if it is in the computer lab, we would block external use of the internet, or we'll only allow the intranet, like in Moodle or Blackboard or Wazi, for the student to be able to answer their tutorials. There are other ways also, but I suppose we could discuss that in another seminar. This one is specifically for students. Right. That's in terms of assessment integrity. So some examples there is to use AI to clarify concepts so that you can explain them in your own words. This is more for understanding maybe very complex terms or decolonizing some particular understanding and so on. But we do have things that you shouldn't be doing. So don't use AI during a closed book test or exams. And you would think that this is obvious, right? To tell students not to use AI during take-home assessments and things like that. But having it in a guide so that it's unambiguous, exactly the intent of the assessment, I think it's halfway of the battle won. In terms of writing, editing, and presenting, now, people will have different opinions of this at Wits, depending on who you talk to. If you talk to someone in the literature department, they might not want students to really use a large language model for anything writing related. They might want the student to be able to write essays all by themselves. Because the learning objective, maybe to acquire a mastery of the language, it requires you to really sit down and do the assessment, all of the writing on your own. However, if you speak to someone else, maybe in the Faculty of Health Sciences or in the Faculty of Science, the instructor there might be more interested in the methodological elements or some other aspects other than writing, in which case they're okay with the student using it for writing, editing, and presenting. So the do's and don'ts here would really differ depending on what you're trying to achieve. But I think we all can agree on is using AIs to generate fully fledged essays or reports is a big no, right? So that would be a big don't. However, using it to refine or fix a few grammatical errors inside of a document should be fine. There's a line that we need to draw, and that line is really dependent on how you are assessing the learning outcomes. Okay, so there's then using AI for brainstorming and research. So this one here is a bit tricky because there is the possibility that a student can use it to generate research questions, to generate hypotheses, and whether that is ethical or not, that kind of thing really should be advised on by the supervisor or the leader of the research. And this is extremely difficult because, like I said, depending on the context and the perspectives you get, you would draw a different line in the sand. So the kind of do's that you would use, that we have in this guideline, is to use AI to explore perspectives and trends and define research ideas. But what we wouldn't want you to do is to use it to generate research questions without any supervisor oversight. So this is also, in terms of what it can be used for and what it can't be used for. Remember that when in using AIs for research, we have these hallucinations that I alluded to earlier, and in order for a student to be able to combat these hallucinations when generating or engaging with an LLM, they need to have mechanisms to do that. So we try to encourage uses of maybe a Google Scholar or Scopus AI to verify citations, to see if they actually do exist, to see if certain theories of prepositions or other things actually do exist. Right, so that's in terms of AI for brainstorming and research. And then finally, for coding and data analysis. Now, like I said before, maybe writing a document in English to the language department, it's really important that the student doesn't use so much of AI to do that. Well, in coding, especially in our first year classes in computer science, where we expect students to learn how to code, we really don't want students to be using AI in coding development or just submitting coded work to the online marker, because then the student obviously wouldn't have learned how to code, and they would walk out of the class with a mark that they didn't deserve. So there has to be some methods in place. It's not enough just to write a guide and say don't use AI for coding. It is also important for lecturers to have invigilated assessments where they can see if the student actually can code in an environment where there is no AI interference. So the kind of do's and don'ts associated with the guide here is maybe using AI to assist in debugging when you are learning how to code, or giving you some test cases to test your program, rather than writing the program for you. And finally, the don'ts is obviously not to submit AI-generated code when you don't fully understand how it works, or at all, for that matter. It really depends on the context or the learning outcomes that you're trying to assess. So in conclusion, there's just some final do's that I'd like to leave you with, is obviously to use AI to support learning, in the case of a Socratic tutor, to help you to brainstorm ideas, but it should never replace your thinking. The second do is to always follow course-specific rules. Well, these rules should be set by us, right? They should be in our learning guides. So what is it called? Course outlines. We should have, each and every one of us should have a section in our course outline that says exactly what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, because we know that they have access to these models. So we've got to be very upfront about it. Whether you know what is appropriate in your field or not should be a discussion that you have in your department. The third one is to really respect the Wits values. We are trying to teach students how to be critical, how to think for themselves. And so that should be first and foremost. And the use of AI should be supporting of fulfilling those values. And finally, like I said before, having something in your course outline that is unambiguous so that students can actually use it to answer questions, or to use AI to be able to complete assessments or to brainstorm or to do anything. It's really important that you have something like that, because you are the point of reference for the student as a lecturer. If the student asks you, can I use AI for this specific thing, you should be the one to answer them. You should be, yes, it should be allowed. And your decision should be guided by the learning outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So as Dr. Owen said earlier, it's almost as if he read my slide, AI is really here to stay. And the goal isn't to avoid AI. Instead, we need to use it wisely. We need to encourage good practice, which is the point of the seminar. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thanks so much, Ritesh. I'm sure the participants have many questions. But before we do that, I'd just like to hand it over to Tanya for a brief contextualization of some of the work that they've been doing in anatomical sciences, and then we'll open the floor, because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and I don't want to take that time away. Tanya, are you able to share your screen, or would you like me to?
Well, let's have a look and see. No, I can't seem to share. Oh, wait. Can everybody see my screen?
There it is. Yeah, that's it.
Perfect.
Great.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Gavin, for having me. Just a brief background on why I'm actually here is that the School of Anatomical Sciences, at that point I was working for them, we had thought that we needed to develop our own statement on the use of generative AI, given that, as we all do, we have many postgraduates, honors students conducting written assessments, etc. And so we thought, before being aware of what the Faculty of Health Sciences was doing, that we should get a lead on this. Now, in doing that, I was asked to draft a statement for the school. However, I was aware that the Faculty of Science and CLTD, so with Ritesh as well as Kershri Padiachi, the postgraduate office with Brett Bowman, I was aware that people had already been starting to develop policies as well as procedures. Policies as well, Martin Becker's been involved in that, Benji Rosman's been involved in that. So it's a university-wide issue that we were talking about. So what we had discussed as a teaching and learning committee, and at that point, to be quite bold, was that people were, of course, scared. Some lecturers had put into course packs that students shouldn't use AI at all. And as Ritesh has just mentioned to everybody, it's important to know when and where and how to use AI responsibly, to consider the learning objectives, to consider what we want as outcomes and how we plan to assess those outcomes. So in generating this, our statement that was eventually taken up and slightly modified by the health science faculty, I've just posted it up here. You'll see that the statement is certainly not as in-depth as the policies that people are developing. And why that is it's used in anatomical sciences course packs as a way of encouraging, directing student agency in ensuring that they understand responsible use and they take ownership of that responsible use. Maybe less understanding, but taking ownership of that responsible use. So if we look at what I had put together, we speak to declarations, really disclosing explicitly what tools, what platforms were used, and in what. Now, part of this at that time was really to ensure that we safeguard ourselves from litigation, we safeguard ourselves from giving students incorrect information as well. Given that at this point it's quite fluid, what are we using AI for? When is it regarded as good use? So something like this, a statement is, it needs to be adaptable. We need to be adaptable as staff. We need to be prepared to not limit ourselves as AI itself is changing and becoming better or worse, depending on your view. We warn students about AI generating fictitious information that Ritesh spoke about. But importantly, we note that the onus lies on the student to verify informations and sources to ensure validity of the content. Now, as we get into more postgraduate research, and this is where Brett Bowman's office really comes into play later on, is us as examiners, us as supervisors, where does the onus actually lie in ensuring the veracity and validity of the content? Another important aspect that we put in, and again, this was in a way just to ensure that we have a bit of cover, was that we reserve the right at the discretion of the head of school, and of course, we could put that in as a head of department, as it were, to request an oral defense. And importantly here, we split coursework from research so that it can be applicable to any scenario in which a supervisor or lecturer needs to ascertain what the student actually knows about the content. In doing that, now this is the tricky part, procedurally, how then do you actually submit a concern to an academic misconduct committee? This requires further consideration, further fleshing out, right? The other thing I included was the rest of the university policies. This is again for cover, but to ensure that staff and students are aware that all of the policies actually dovetail with each other. So we mentioned student discipline, misconduct, plagiarism, but importantly, I also included any other policies as well as guidelines that the university might develop regarding the use of generative tools. Now, why that is because it's happening so rapidly, is that to generate a static statement would be insufficient to protect both the students and the staff. We included the Microsoft Copilot formalized agreement, and here's Ritesh's annexure coming from the Faculty of Science, and in this, encouraging student agency to really say, what did I use? Of course, before this, they're going to have to ask themselves, why did I use this? This, over time, would have to be developed. It would have to be thought about in our context. And I think that's the worry as well. As Ritesh said, when it comes to the humanities, writing, content generation, idea generation becomes very important, but so too in certain cases within the health sciences, in public health, in take-home assessments for students, which I used previously in anatomical sciences as well. So having a statement that's going to be alive, so to speak, is something that we really need to use. And I think as staff, we're aware that we like, particularly in our faculty, we like directions. We like to know specific procedures. But ultimately, while the university gives us or will give us a general policy, the procedures and the specifics will have to go through the faculties into our own schools and departments, where in line with our learning objectives and outcomes, we're going to have to make those calls as lecturing staff. So that's it from me, a quick wrap up, and happy to share questions as well in that regard. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Yes, and thank you to both Ritesh and Tanya for that, I think, a fantastic overview of both the document and where it's come and how it's been developed for the faculty itself, as well as the philosophies and principles behind it. Thank you so much. I'd like to open now the floor to conversation with Ritesh and Tanya. Are there any questions or concerns about that? Perhaps, Ritesh, if I may just start, just to clarify, and there is a lot of discussion, and you did allude to it, this ability to detect AI. And I think it's really important for your strong voice to come through that we actually shouldn't be and we can't accurately detect AI. Obviously, there are some software online that has been claimed to detect AI, and they have percentages. But it's obviously it seems from your expertise that we aren't able and we shouldn't be doing that. I just want to engage with that a little bit more, because there are some practices in the faculty about trying to detect it, which is unfortunately a little sketchy. So thanks, Ritesh.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, right? So in Turnitin, it was very easy. In Turnitin, you would identify an exact match, and you would have a link of that exact match to an artifact somewhere on the internet, maybe a publication from IEEE or a publication from the Journal of Medicine or Nature. And so that could be used as evidence to say, look, this came before your work, and this is it looks exactly like that document. And that is a basis at which you can hold a student responsible. So you can literally take that to a committee, and we can all sit down, and there's no denying that has actually occurred. However, with large language models, it's extremely difficult. There are parameters within the models. As I said before, GPT-4, for example, has about 1.1 trillion parameters. That is 1 with 12 zeros, right? There is a lot of parameters. Each of those parameters are different. And there are more global parameters, like, for example, temperature, like I said, which has a likeness to either being very tethered to the training data or being very random. And so just changing something like temperature for any prompt, you would get a range of different answers. Some that are very close to the training data, which might be more easily to detect, and others that are more creative, more random, and so on. So in terms of detecting it, the software that you would find online are softwares that claim to use something called perplexity to be able to identify if something is close or far away from the model. But for that to work, you need exactly the generating distribution. You need exactly the parameters that was used at the time to create that a particular model. You need exactly the setting of temperature, exactly the setting of entropy, and for all of the different parameters associated with the model. Having that information is not, it is not feasible simply because the model changes every day. So that is not substantial evidence. That is not evidence that is good enough to be able to sit a student down and take legal action against them. And so that's the main reason why it is not possible to do so.
Thanks, Ritesh. Yeah, that's a really well-explained example, and I think it's a really important consideration for everyone moving forward when we start to talk about these things. Thank you so much. Pradeep, I see you have please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin, and thanks, Ritesh, for a good presentation. And so my question, so like humanities, I also have concerns for health sciences. So we getting old, and after some time, I don't want to get treated by a doctor who's AI trained to be on a or assessed or assessment presented by AI. So so that's a concern really. And even if Tanya was saying responsible use as well as and what you say ownership of responsible use, but how do we inculcate this culture in them, in the students? That is there I don't know if there's some set of articles that, because it becomes part of ethics as well, I suppose. So yeah, some literature if you can share with us from your side. Thank you. I don't want to take more time. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dr. Kumar. So that's a very important question, and a lot of things. It's something that most people don't know about LLMs. So if you have a machine, right, like a car, right, and if you press the accelerator, we know exactly what's going to happen. You can trace the mechanisms from the time you're pressing the gasoline up to the car being moved. You can literally trace that. You can break the car apart, and you can say, okay, pressing this pedal activates a lever, the lever activates something else, the piston's activated, and so on and so on. And you can write that down, and we can understand it, and we can put it down on a table, and we all can understand how it works. Unfortunately, with LLMs, that's not the case. If you are a doctor in a theater, and you have a patient in front of you, and let's say there's something wrong with the patient and there's some action that needs to occur. So you ask the AI, which of the arteries should I cut? Okay, because the patient is dying. The AI will say, cut this particular artery. A good surgeon will always ask why. Why should I cut this particular artery? Then the AI will say, I can explain it to you, but you're not going to understand. You're not going to understand. Your human brain won't be able to comprehend the mechanics of my software, the billions of activation functions that were fired when I made this particular decision. But just know that I get it right 98% of the time. The question is, will you cut that artery? And I wouldn't, because when it comes to problems where there are strong ethical considerations, understanding exactly the procedure of the procedure of how you came to the conclusion is so important, being able to understand that, so that you can know under what conditions will the machine fail. And so in problems like this, where we have strong ethical considerations, using black box techniques for these problems is especially problematic. And so that's why we are very cautious when we use things like neural networks in medicine, when we use it in education, when we use it in psychology, and so on. It's a very important comment to make.
Thanks, Ritesh. Tanya, I saw your hand. There we go. Please go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you, Gavin. Just to add to the first comment as well, is that the idea on catching students, a lot of staff want to catch students. And I think what Ritesh has highlighted in the ability of software to identify similarity. The similarity index itself is insufficient to even accuse a student of plagiarism. In that case, the school's academic misconduct committees would sit, you'd look at the level of similarity, et cetera, before a student is even alleged to have committed an act of plagiarism. But it's in that where we as staff need to be very cautious on the language that we're using. The other unfortunate way in which, as to answer Pradeep's comment as well, to talk to that, is to start changing how we teach and how we assess, and to start engaging students more and more in different ways. In different ways, Ritesh spoke to coding, for example. If you're going to code live in a restricted environment, we could also develop ideas like that. We know we have large classes, but where people are doing different essays or running different ideas, thoughts, writing, right? So we do discussion themes, for example, where students have to write short paragraphs that could be done in-house with restriction. How do we ensure that they do it, Pradeep, and that they have some idea of integrity and agency? Is to start showing them that it's not, using AI is not smoking illicitly in the park, and we're bringing it to the front. We're showing people that it's okay to use, but how do we use it? We actually have the conversations with our students. So I haven't been tracking like Ritesh has, but with my previous honors students, I have asked them, how do you use it? in writing. And I'm getting feedback. Students want to also give you feedback to actually develop the procedures and the policies together. You know, we talk about student-centeredness, but I think right now we're all very much afraid. But I think if we bring it to the fore, with our own fears as well, I think there's a way we'll manage over time. But changing our learning objectives and embedding the use of AI is going to be something that we have to look at relatively soon.
Thanks, Tanya. Shada.
Hi,
Please go
Gavin.
ahead.
Thanks, guys. It was a very good presentation, very informative. So when Gavin shared the statement to the Educational Technologies Committee, I remember thinking that it's very well written and this is like we're going in the right direction. So I was just thinking, if we adopt this, maybe, I'm just thinking from our department's perspective, we'll probably maybe add task-specific tiers of allowed AI use in different tasks. So I mean, I've seen lots of articles on how they tier it from, you know, literally no use to extreme use, which is not going to be allowed. So I think I'm just thinking just out loud that that's probably what we're going to consider to do in addition to that statement that you have written so well. Thanks.
Thanks, Shada. Yeah, I think that's the intention of these documents, as Ritesh mentioned, and Tanya, about this having a little bit of an open and not too policing, but allowing it to be adapted to the department. We'll have a broad statement for the faculty and allow the departments to tailor it to the specific purpose at each level. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or? So I have another question if there's no other questions. This idea of the Socratic tutorage is really, really fantastic, and I think it's going to be one of the only things that have been shown to be really effective in education is one-on-one tutoring, and having an AI that can do that for you is going to be fantastic for teaching and learning. But obviously, it doesn't automatically do that. An AI doesn't do that. The prompting really what matters, and there's some really fantastic initiatives that's been started by the School of Physiology. They developed a tutoring chatbot for their particular context, and that's been spread through the faculty. Our departments and school have used it as well. But it's about tailoring the particular chatbot for that tutorage. What do you recommend for those students that are just engaging with ChatGPT? The prompting, they will just give you the information and not actually be a tutor. So how do we go about doing that for the general open source AIs that we have?
Yeah, so it's very possible to have a LLM version at Wits. It's very possible to do that, and I'm not sure why we haven't done it yet. We could have a specific chat box. I think it's called a Kudu chat. We could have something like that, a version of it, where the Socratic method is very much ingrained, and we could use that as a tutor. Because remember, it's just the style of engagement that's changed, right? It's not giving the answers. It's trying to encourage the student to come up with the answer themselves. This is more of a high-level instruction that you can just install into a LLM. And if we make a local version of this available, our students can be using it as part of their laboratory activities. They could even be using it. They could be engaging with it in labs, asking it questions, and then having the AI maybe just nudge the student in the right direction every now and then. So it's very possible to do that. The technology allows for it. The steps towards doing it, we would have to do collectively as a faculty.
Thanks, Ritesh. Tanya?
In addition to that, I think two things. The Department of Anatomical Pathology is also developing a chatbot. And with that, we had started talking about the ethics behind the information that is being used. And this is something as a faculty we also have to give consideration to. And maybe people like Kevin Behrens need to come on board to discuss. We're using all of this collective information from books, from articles, etc. And Ritesh will know best about, the songs, the literature that all of these LLMs are being trained on. What do we as a faculty, what do we as a university then say when we ourselves are using training information without true consent. So in the development of these chatbots, we also need to think further on IP, copyright, and the ethics around that as well.
Thanks, Tanya. The ethics of and this going out into the world and what we're actually using is an important consideration as well. Thanks, Tanya. Theodore, please join the conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This was a very important conversation to have. It's some sort of forces us to evolve, as an institution. So my question, is based on this, on the students' incentive. For example, for instance, okay, in this particular instance, we know that we cannot accurately say that the student has plagiarized using AI. And then the document that is being presented, it's some sort of it doesn't have it's continuous, meaning that in future there might be a potential, how do we safeguard the student to ensure that they declare it? And then what will be the benefit for them, knowing that if they've declared, they won't be, in future, they won't be penalized or they won't be litigated for some reason. And yeah, I think I can stop here.
Yeah, okay, maybe I'll answer that one. So it is, like I said before, there is no real way of knowing whether a student actually used AI in their writing or not, right? In terms of, it's at the end of the road, no, right? So there has been a viva voce, viva voce for PhDs that have now been introduced for this exact reason, to assess the ability of a student to defend their work. So we can still attain all of those learning outcomes, It's not like, the student just writes a thesis and then it goes through the examiners and now it's the end of the road. No, it's not anymore. Wits is now, it now introduced a policy that requires PhDs to defend their work. And this will happen again. I'm sure it'll happen for masters as well in light of the circumstances. So obviously it's better to trial something out and see how it goes, because you have to source examiners and so on, a panel to actually listen to the PhD and give valuable feedback. So I'm sure down the road we'll have one for masters as well. But in terms of auditing, right now we can't do it, and I doubt there is any time in the future where we'll be able to audit exactly the extent of the use of AI, which is why it is important for us as a faculty to build good practice and to encourage good practice. The students are very susceptible to learning, especially from us. The lecturers, the course coordinators, they tend to listen to us. If we can encourage good practice, then I don't think we need to audit them. They would audit themselves, since there is no mechanism to do it anyways.
Thanks, Ritesh. Craig, I'm happy to hear from you. Go ahead, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I've just had a number of thoughts, so no questions, but maybe some comments on the things that we've been discussing, and I agree with everything that's been said. I just find it quite interesting in all the conversations I've had with colleagues all over the university on AI. The fear always comes out on, we always talk about assessment and not learning, and I think it just highlights maybe the problem we have as educators. We're always focusing on assessments. How do I assess the students, as opposed to how can I use this tool to help the students learn? In our department in forensic medicine, we use AI quite extensively. We encourage the students to use it, but we have developed that workshop to train them on how to use it appropriately and ethically. And I found it's still early days, but I find it quite interesting that I haven't seen any significant change in the outcomes of their assessments in terms of marks. And I've been pondering on this, and I think it's a matter of, students that tend to want to go the easy way out and plagiarize and cheat, because they're putting a little effort, they're going to put very little effort into the prompting of AI, and so the output's not going to be as good either. And so I just thought that was quite an interesting, observation from my side. But my experience with most of our students, they're quite good at self-regulation. They want to know how to use it appropriately. And I think, at the end of the day, if we're worried about assessment, we need to change how we are assessing and, assume that AI will be used by the students. So how can I set up an assessment that will still appropriately assess their personal learning over what's just going to be entered into AI?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, that workshop that you've developed, the AI task team might be coming to chat to you quite soon to see how we can expand that to the faculty. So thank you so much. I'm sure I know we over time, and I don't want to take Prof. Ritesh's time, too much more of his time. Would you like to wrap up for us, or how long?
No, that's fine, Gavin. Thank you. I want to thank you all, the team for putting it together, and Ritesh for joining us and sharing of your expertise in the discussions, and Tanya contextualizing it for our faculty. I think the work in progress, unfortunately, is something that we're going to have to keep up with really fast. So as soon as we have what we think are guidelines for one assignment, they might be different for the next. And I think that that's something that all lecturers are going to have to face for themselves. But certainly looking very much forward to the guidance of those who are working with it in the faculty who want to make this a reality. And I just underscore Tanya's final message, which was we really have to look at the different ways that we ask students to learn, and the different ways that we therefore think that we're teaching, and the different ways that we can assess students, so that we can make the most of the AI and not have to worry about all the policing that I think worries most lecturers. So it's a fantastic conversation. I'd like to keep it up and running, and thank you all for putting together today's webinar. Next week, we're looking very forward to, as you mentioned, physiology have had their chatbot up and running, and Chloe and Richard are going to come and talk to us about the choices that they made and what's actually happening with that chatbot. So looking forward to seeing you all there then. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ritesh. Thanks, Tanya.